Welcome to Illo Talk. I am Cory Kerr, and this is episode 173. I drew an album cover. This album cover is pretty cool. I like it. I'm excited about it. The band came to me, and they had a pretty cool idea where they described, we want somebody like sitting in a house, like totally chill, eating some pizza, and then with like all heck breaking loose outside. And that was the direction. I kind of went back to him and said, hey, do you want like monsters? Do you want like fires, natural disasters? And they said, hey, do whatever you want. So giant robots fighting giant monsters and fish. That's what I got. Anyway, today I want to talk about advice. I find advice to be really interesting. It's an interesting subject to think about. The fact that somebody might think that they have all of the answers, or that they have enough life experience to be able to tell someone else what they should do with their life. And I find this interesting because I give advice, and it's weird to think about. And I think I want to talk about the kind of stages of people's lives and their ability to give accurate and good advice, both specifically and generally. And so when we're talking about that, somebody who has like, 2 weeks of experience with something, they might have some extremely specific advice about stuff. Watch out for the X. But they might not have very good long-term advice. In my experience, these type of things tend to happen. Okay, but they can have very specific experience, but it's not going to be based on a lot of data and a lot of events, and you can't get into like patterns and things like that. So, talking to an illustrator who's done 2 client jobs, you can get some very specific advice about those specific clients. But talking to an illustrator who's worked for 35 years in the industry, and has had thousands and thousands of different clients, you can get some very general advice that's based on trends and patterns. But it's a lot less specific. And the reason that it's a lot less specific is because a lot of people forget what it's like after their situation changes. And so our experiences change us. As we go through life and we experience more things, we continue to learn, and that learning changes who we are and our perception of things. And so this idea that you bring your experiences with you to your perceptions is kind of interesting. So if I were to draw the letter A, you guys would all recognize it as the letter A because you've been taught the alphabet. But I can draw it in a number of ways. There's thousands of fonts that depict the letter A differently. And yet your experiences, your past experiences with many different ways of drawing the letter A, will color that. But somebody that comes to that for the first time, and it's the first time that they see the letter A, they're going to look at that and they're going to say, what is that? Right? Because their past experience has not given them any, it hasn't given them any indication or context into what those lines or forms might be. And this is kind of interesting, and I find it interesting with parenting. It seems like whenever you become a parent or whenever you mention parenting, people's immediate response is to start giving you advice. And one of the most entertaining things is people without kids have a certainty of what is right and what is wrong for parents, like, I don't have kids myself, but I know X. It's like, do you really know X? Or do you just have very strong, unfounded opinions, right? And then parents who are in the thick of it, right? Their kids are teething. It's their first child. They know specifically what works for them. But that doesn't necessarily mean that works for everybody else. It just means for their kid, they've figured out specifically what is working. And that will change. I found with Scarlett that we figured out what worked and we solved the problems. And then those problems changed and it stopped working and we had to figure something else out. And it seems like it's every 3 to 6 months where we're like, yeah, we've solved this issue that we have with her. And then all of a sudden it's like, here's a new one. You're like, oh, good. That was not, or she adapts or whatever. But then one of the most interesting things that I find is people who were parents, I guess they are still parents, but their kids have all grown. Maybe they have all left the house. But the further away you get from your kids being tiny children, the more you forget about what it's actually like to have tiny children. And so the advice that you're getting from the grandparents about parenting is much more generalized and oftentimes colored to a point and filtered to a point where it's not terribly useful to those of us that are beginning out or just starting, because they've forgotten what it's like. They've forgotten what it's like to have a kid like that. And so think about this. Most people in your memory that you haven't met recently, you will imagine them to either be very bad or very good. Your memory tends to polarize things. It polarizes experiences. It polarizes, unless you make a specific effort to go out of your way and to not think of that experience in a negative or a positive light and to think of it as a balanced thing, most of your memories are going to be exceptionally positive or exceptionally negative. When in reality, those events might have had a lot of bad stuff about them, but there were some good things. Or might have had a lot of good things about them, but there were some bad things. And as we move further and further away from an event, or a memory or a time period in our life, our memory polarizes that by gleaning the highlights and forgetting the details. And it's kind of an interesting thing, right? And so with advice, I find it entertaining when people are like, here's how you should get started in the industry. And I find that entertaining for two reasons. One reason is that might have worked for you, but that bridge is fallen. And I've done a whole video on this. You guys should watch it. But that path has been blazed and is no longer a path that anyone can take, because the industry's changed, the situation has changed, lots of things have changed. Then the other thing that I find interesting about it is you might not remember what it's like to start out. Because, if that was 10 years ago, 7 years ago, 20 years ago, even if it was 2 or 3 years ago, you've begun to forget details. You've begun to polarize your feelings, and you've begun to generalize and look for patterns rather than specific instances. And yet, taking advice from somebody who's new, they don't have the benefit of experience. They don't have the benefit of large amounts of data to draw from. They don't have the benefit of people who, have gone through a number of experiences and been able to see, I noticed this pattern. Clients who say these types of things tend to be this way. Because if you base that on one experience, then it could just be that dude. Or you could be totally wrong. You have no idea. Right? And so that's why I say that the best and the most dangerous advice that you'll get is from people with 5 years of experience. Because when I first got out of college and I started, I remember thinking, everyone around me is an idiot. It's so obvious. Just do X and Y, right? These are the things that you should do. Why is everybody so stupid? And then I began to try to do those things. And I realized that those things, while they might be good ideas, are not always applicable in every situation, or even more so, they're exceptionally difficult to do, or you can't do those things because there are some barriers that I was completely unaware of. And so then years go by, and before I became a seasoned and jaded veteran of whatever, right, there's this sweet spot in about 5 years where I thought, man, I've really got this figured out. And most people about 5 years after graduation feel like, yeah, I've nailed this. I've got this figured out. I know exactly what's going on. And that could be called hubris. It could also be called, confidence or whatever you want to call it. But that confidence is a little bit blind. You're a little bit blind to the things that you haven't figured out yet and how young you actually are in those experiences. But at the same time, that confidence gives you the ability to, with confidence, say and do things that you might not say or do later after you've been burned a few times or after, you've had some more negative experiences or you just become kind of worn down or jaded or whatever. And so when you're young, you're still learning and everything is still new and you come across these things and they're still fresh. And the interesting thing that I find is, in teaching is those people that, and I find this in myself too, that have taught for a little while, they forget what it's like to learn that stuff. I remember thinking several times, why don't you guys know this yet? This is just basic stuff. You've been doing this for a while. And then I realized, this is the beginning of the semester. It's just that I've taught this class for 3 years. It's that I've had, I don't know how many, over 1,000 students go through this particular curriculum that I've developed. And they've all come out successful, not all of them. Well, a huge majority of them come out successful, knowing a lot more about this process or whatever, because they've had experience with it. But then I kind of look at people who haven't gone through that process yet, and I'm like, I forget that they have to go through that process. And I just think, what's taking you so long? Why is this so hard? I've forgotten what it's like. I've forgotten, for me, the years of struggle. They're not at the forefront of my mind. The years of struggle of trying to learn Adobe Illustrator or Adobe Photoshop or learn how to draw the human figure, which I'm still practicing and trying to figure out. But the interesting thing about it is, as you get older, you forget what it's like to learn those things. And so sometimes the best teachers are those that just learned it because they remember how they learned it. And the worst teachers are the ones that never had to struggle with it. And so if you never had to struggle with it, it's very difficult for you to relate to those that have to struggle with it, because to you it just came. Math just makes sense. These scientific concepts just came to you and just made sense. And you didn't have to fight, struggle, study, figure it out. It's just, you were just able to do it. And so those that come after you that are trying to fight, struggle, and figure it out, you just go, here's some really bad and generalized advice that's not specific because I've forgotten or I didn't struggle. And so this whole concept of advice is interesting. And I think about this a lot because on this channel, I'm trying to figure out what I want to do and what I want to say. And a lot of things that I want to do and I want to say are kind of advice driven. And so I wonder sometimes, does advice have to be permanent? Does advice have to be something that stands the test of time? Or can it be good enough for the moment? Because I've gotten great advice that helped me to figure out what was going on at the time and move me forward. But then in retrospect, turned out to be exceptionally bad advice if I were to take that and apply it universally to every subject, or continue to follow that after I moved on past that thing. But does that make it bad advice, or does it make it advice that has a expiration date on it? And so I don't think advice has to be permanent. Now, there's some really good advice out there. I think lots of religions and cultures have come to the same conclusion that honesty, kindness, whether you want to call that the law of the harvest, whether you want to call that karma, whether you want to call that the law of reciprocity, there's lots of different names for this concept of what you put out into the world will give you back. Some timelessness in advice like that. But other advice isn't necessarily bad advice if it has an expiration date. And so that's why I think that somebody who has 5 years of experience is going to give you the best and the most dangerous advice, because if you take it wrong, as if it's the gospel truth, doctrine from on high, God-given things that you should live your life by every moment of every day for the next 35 years, that advice has an expiration date. But if you're just starting out and there's somebody 3 to 5 years ahead of you and they give you some advice, that advice could be very specific and very useful for a time before it expires. It's kind of this interesting thing. And so I want to talk about 2 pieces of advice that I've gotten. One that I thought was good and turned out to be exceptionally bad. And one that kind of changed the way that I look at things and turned out to be something that helped me move into a lot of peace and contentment in my life and continues to drive me forward and is general enough to where I think it could be universally applicable. So the first one is when I got engaged, my grandpa, who'd been married for decades, 60 plus years at the time, he pulled me aside and he said, I give all my grandsons this advice. When you are getting married, you're going to move into a relationship where you and your spouse together need to figure things out. And here's what I've decided. If you let her decide whatever she wants, whenever she wants, and give her everything that she wants, then when you put your foot down, or when you do actually say, no, this is important to me, she'll listen because you never challenge anything. And a number of my cousins have said that they followed this advice, and I followed this advice, and I find it to be exceptionally bad advice. It was very specific to his situation. He was abused as a child, and his wife, my grandma, was an incredible person and very empathetic, and realized that that's what he was doing and worked with that. So whenever he did say, actually, Shirley, this is the way I'd like things to be, she would say, okay, I'm going to go with that. But what happened in my marriage and a lot of the marriages of my cousins is that I lost the skills and ability to express my opinion. And I suppressed what it is that I wanted, and I became kind of a non-participating entity in the relationship. And it kind of resulted in me not having an opinion ever and being very frustrated that my wife couldn't read my mind or that we always did what she wanted to do, when that was the very situation, not because she was going out of her way to be domineering or anything like that, or even forcing her opinion on me, but it was because I took some really bad advice to heart and applied it universally to everything in my life. It was really, really a bad idea. And since then, it took us a few years, but since then I've started to say, I would like things to be like this. And she says, well, I would like things to be like this. And then we talk about why, and we come together and we discuss the pros and cons, and we weigh it out and we make a decision. Usually that decision is one way or the other or somewhere in between. And the balance of that is much, much better than what I was doing with this bad advice. Now, this good advice is general enough to where I think it's universally applicable. I changed my major 5 times in college. I was really indecisive, and I was one of those people who decided that the choices that I made in college would drastically impact the rest of my life. And, if I chose the wrong major, then forever should I be stuck in the rut, or whatever. Anyway, so I thought that choosing my major was significantly important. And I think there's some importance to it, but I think we put way too much importance on it. There are lots of people that I know that chose weird majors that they don't even do anything with anymore, and they're fine. They're fine, right? And anyway, so what I did was I went and I talked to a bunch of different people, and I went and talked to the psychology department chair. And anyway, he kind of tore apart my thinking kind of interestingly. And then he said, here's what you need to do. Okay, you seem to be wanting the answer, the one path that will get you where you want to be, and yet you don't know where you want to be. But here's what you need to do. Choose a direction, the best direction you can think of, and work as hard as you can to go in that direction until that direction doesn't make sense anymore, and then go in a different direction. He said, do something good until that stops working, and then do something else good. And that concept of doing something good until that stops working and then doing something else good, I think is one of the most useful pieces of advice that I've ever received. Because he didn't say you should be a psychology major and you could go and get this job. And this is how you go and do that. But it was really general advice where I would have to add the specifics as those specifics changed and as they applied into my career and my circumstances and my life and my thoughts and my feelings and my experiences that I bring to the table during that decision. I always just think, is this good? Is this the best thing that I can be doing according to what I understand and what I know right now? Well, I'm going to keep doing that until it stops working. And then if the situation changes, or if I change, or if I grow past that or discover new things that are bigger and better, then I can move on and I can do those good things. And that has literally shaped my career and my life for the last 14 years since I had that conversation. Is that right? Anyway, and I have learned and become and done so many things because I spend a significant portion of my free time seeking after doing something good, the best good thing that I can come up with, until that stops working and then I do something else good. And so I find it interesting when you compare those two pieces of advice, that one is exceptionally specific and worked for an individual, and the other was exceptionally general. And I think that advice would work for almost anyone in any situation. And so I don't know where I'm going with this, but I just wanted to talk about advice for a little bit. So here's my advice. Take what you like of other people's advice and ignore the rest. And take it with a grain of salt, knowing that you can adapt their advice to your situation and take into account where they are in their experience. With drawing, I'm a couple years down the road. Now I'm about five or 6 years down the road in drawing. And so a lot of the advice that I give when it comes to illustration might be really dangerous because it has an expiration date. But it could also be really good because I'm not so far removed from starting that I've forgotten what it's like to struggle with how to draw a hand, or, how to get depth into your illustrations or whatever. Because some of those things are not so ingrained in me that they're intuitive, because when something becomes intuitive, you begin to forget the mechanics of it, and it becomes kind of just an instinctual thing. So anyway, that's that. Guys, I am really excited about my new website. It's really cool. I finally switched over to Squarespace, and this isn't an endorsement or anything. I don't have like an affiliate account with them, but you should go to corykerr.com and check it out, because the way that they have allowed me to just say, here's a bunch of my artwork, is pretty sick. It's pretty slick, and I really like it. Anyway, I think that's cool. You can also grab stuff on Amazon, and if you want to see the tools that I am using to do some of this stuff, some of the pens and paper and whatnot, I have that at corykerr.com/tools, and those are affiliate links. And so when you click on that link, what it does is it says to Amazon, hey, Cory Kerr sent me here. And then they give me a small kickback of anything that you buy. And so if you're like, I'm going to buy something on Amazon and I want to support this channel, go to corykerr.com/tools and click on one of those pens and then search where you want. And they'll say, hey, thanks for sending us a customer, Cory Kerr. Here's a cut. All right. So that's kind of cool. Along those same lines with affiliate accounts, if you are interested in getting some audiobooks and you want a free audiobook, then you can look in the description of this video and you can get a free audiobook from Audible. And I listen to audiobooks all the time. I would highly recommend starting with the great courses. Those great courses are so awesome. And they'll give me a kickback if you do that. And I'm finally going to stop promoting the hosting account that I was promoting for a little while, because I was with it for 10 years and I really liked it and it worked really well, and I've just found better solutions. And so I can't continue to shill and support something that I'm not doing myself. So anyway, If you like this video and you don't want to spend any money, that's cool. Hit that thumbs up and subscribe if you're new here, and share it if you found it valuable. And anyway, the best thing that you can do, because I'm really just doing this for the conversation, is leave a comment. I'm curious what you think about the specific versus general, memories being polarized, whether advice has an expiration date or there's just good or bad advice specifically or generally. Curious on what you guys think about that. Also, in the comments, if you guys wanted to leave something about the good or bad advice that you have received and followed and why it was good or bad advice. Maybe we can have like a whole advice conversation about this. So anyway, you guys are awesome. Thanks for listening and thanks for watching, and we'll catch you later. I'm out.